The ceremony takes place under a hot golden sun that pours through the church windows, casting long shadows on the wooden pews. The guests are eager, their murmurs of excitement filling the air as the bride makes her entrance. Eliza's steps are measured, slow, as if she's walking toward her doom. Her face, while masked in makeup, betrays a deep well of sorrow in her eyes. Her gaze doesn't meet anyone's, instead staring ahead as if the aisle stretches forever. She's a figure of beauty and elegance, yet an air of unease surrounds her, a tension that no one can quite place, but that Dylan feels deeply. Sitting in the back row, Dylan Turner watches her with an intensity that seems to slice through the air. The cowboy has always preferred the wide-open plains, the dust under his boots, not the suffocating formality of a wedding. His calloused hands grip the edge of the pew as if trying to steady himself. His rugged features remain stoic, but his mind races. He recalls the days when Eliza was his, the stolen moments they shared under the moonlight, before she vanished from his life without a word. Seeing her here now, standing at the altar of another man, ignites something fierce within him, a mixture of anger, longing, and regret. As Eliza finally stands at the altar, she seems lost in a world of her own. Her chest rises and falls in shallow breaths, her face pale despite the makeup. The priest's voice booms in the background, yet Eliza appears to be miles away. Dylan can see the subtle tremble in her hands as they rest on the bouquet, her knuckles white. She looks neither happy nor resigned, but something darker lingers in her expression. It's as if she knows that this moment is not hers to claim, that she's being forced into something that doesn't fit her, something she's not ready for. The vows are about to begin. Henry Cartwright, the man standing beside Eliza, seems eager, almost too eager, to make her his. His smile is too wide, his eyes gleaming with something Dylan doesn't trust. The contrast between the groom's excitement and Eliza's apparent detachment is striking. Dylan's heart races as he watches her closely. She shifts on her feet, her lips parting just enough for a whisper to escape. "I am the bride of sin." The words are barely audible to anyone but him, but the weight of them crushes the air in the room. A deep sense of dread washes over Dylan as he absorbs her words. A cold shiver runs down Dylan's spine. What did she mean by those words? Eliza, the woman he once loved, the one he thought he knew so well, is now a stranger to him. Her whispered confession lingers in his mind like a dark omen, pushing him to the edge of an emotion he cannot contain. He watches her, trying to read her, trying to understand. Why is she here? Why is she so distant, so detached from everything around her? And why, after all this time, does she look so broken, so unrecognizable from the woman he once knew? The room falls silent as Eliza's gaze briefly flits toward Dylan. For a fraction of a second, their eyes lock. It's a brief, almost imperceptible connection, but it's enough. Her eyes widen ever so slightly, a flicker of recognition, of pain. It's a silent plea for him to understand, to know that this moment isn't just about a wedding, it's about a woman who has been caught in a web she cannot escape. The priest continues with the vows, unaware of the silent exchange, unaware of the deep current running between the cowboy and the bride. As the ceremony proceeds, Dylan's mind drifts to the memories he had buried deep within himself. How could he ever have thought they were destined for happiness? Eliza had been his world once, but now she stands there as a symbol of everything he lost, everything he could never have. His fists tighten as he watches Henry place the ring on her finger. For a brief moment, Dylan wonders if he should stand up, interrupt the ceremony, and take Eliza away from all of this. But then, the voice inside him whispers, "You can't, she's already gone." The final words of the ceremony are spoken, and the guests rise to their feet, clapping and cheering. But Dylan remains still. He doesn't join in the applause, doesn't move an inch. His mind is a storm of confusion and frustration. There is no happily ever after here, not for him and not for her. He watches as Eliza steps down the aisle with Henry, her face still blank, still hiding the depth of her inner turmoil. But as she passes by him, Dylan catches one last fleeting look from her. The smallest of glances, as though she's pleading for him to understand. Understand what? The questions in his mind multiply, but the answers remain just out of reach. The wedding ceremony carries on around Dylan, but his mind is no longer in the present. The sounds of the priest's words fade into the background as memories of a time long past flood his consciousness. It's as though the years fall away, and he's once again standing in the dusty fields of his youth. He can see her clearly, Eliza, her laughter ringing in the air like music. She was everything to him, wild, untamed, but with a gentleness that made her shine. They were two souls meant to be together, or so he believed. The connection between them was electric, something undeniable, and every touch, every kiss felt like a promise of forever. They spent hours under the starlit sky, talking about everything and nothing. Dylan could still hear her soft voice, whispering her dreams, sharing her hopes for the future. She was a woman who saw the world differently, who spoke of adventures beyond the dusty plains they called home. He remembers the warmth of her skin, the way she fit perfectly against him when they embraced. They'd made plans to marry, to build a life together. Everything seemed so simple, so right. But, as with most things in his life, nothing good ever lasted. One fateful day, Eliza vanished. No explanation, no warning, just a letter left behind and a world turned upside down. The letter had been short, almost cold in its brevity. It offered no real answers, just a few words telling him she had to leave. Something about family, about a responsibility she couldn't escape. Dylan had searched high and low for her, asking anyone who might know where she had gone. He even went to the extremes of visiting places he'd never thought to go before, hoping for a glimpse of her face or a hint of where she could be. But all his efforts were in vain. She was gone, and there was no explanation, no closure. The memory of that day still haunted him, the way his heart had dropped when he realized she was truly gone. Back in the present, Dylan's heart twists painfully as he watches Eliza stand beside another man. Henry Cartwright, the wealthy rancher, looks like the complete opposite of Dylan. Polished, refined, and everything that Dylan is not. He feels a wave of anger rise within him, mingled with a deep sense of betrayal. How could she have gone from being with him, someone who understood her, to this man who seemed so wrong for her? Henry smiles proudly, clearly unaware of the storm of emotions Dylan is battling inside. The sight of Eliza in his arms, about to be married to him, feels like a sharp knife in Dylan's chest. Dylan's gaze lingers on Eliza as she stands at the altar, her eyes fixed on Henry, her face a mask of resignation. His stomach churns as he notices a slight tremor in her hands, the same hands that once held his with such tenderness. As the priest speaks the sacred words, Dylan catches a glimpse of a tear rolling down Eliza's cheek, a tear that doesn't seem to belong to this moment of celebration. It's a tear of sorrow, of something deeper that is being buried beneath her fragile composure. He wonders if it's guilt, regret, or maybe something even darker. But whatever it is, Dylan knows it's a reflection of the truth. Eliza is not happy, and she's not where she belongs. The ceremony continues, but Dylan feels as though time has slowed down. Each word spoken feels like a hammer, driving the wedge between them even further. He watches Eliza with a mixture of longing and confusion. Why had she left him all those years ago? What could have been so important that she'd chosen to disappear without a trace? And why, after all this time, had she returned? There were so many questions swirling in his mind, but the answers eluded him, locked behind the veil of Eliza's silence. Every time he tried to confront her, she shut him out, and he could feel the emotional distance between them growing wider. Dylan's fists clench, his body tense as the realization hits him. Eliza isn't the same woman she once was. She's changed. Perhaps she's been broken, molded by circumstances beyond her control. But what did Henry have to do with all of this? Was he the reason Eliza had left Dylan in the first place? The more Dylan thinks about it, the more it seems like Henry has been at the center of everything that has gone wrong between him and Eliza. The pieces of the puzzle are starting to fall into place, but they don't make the picture any clearer. In fact, they only make the mystery deeper. As Eliza takes the final vows, Dylan finds himself at a crossroads. He has so many emotions bottled up inside him, so many questions and frustrations that he doesn't know how to express. He wants to reach out, to pull her aside and demand the truth, but he knows better. The woman he loved is gone, replaced by a stranger he can no longer understand. Dylan feels like a fool, sitting here helplessly as another man claims the woman who was once his. His heart is heavy with a mix of anger and sorrow, and the weight of the years apart feels like it's crushing him all over again. What had gone wrong? What had been lost? As the ceremony reaches its conclusion, Dylan's gaze never leaves Eliza. He watches her step forward, hand in hand with Henry, the weight of the past and the bitterness of the present hanging heavily in the air. The tears in Eliza's eyes seem to be a silent cry for everything that was lost, for everything that never came to pass. Dylan watches her disappear into the crowd, knowing that no matter what happens from here on out, nothing will ever be the same between them again. The cowboy has lost his chance, and Eliza, the woman he once loved, is now forever out of reach. Dylan stood alone outside, his back pressed against the splintered fence, watching the guests inside the reception hall through the partially open door. The laughter, the clinking of glasses, all felt like a world apart from his. He couldn't shake the image of Eliza standing at the altar, her eyes filled with sorrow as she vowed herself to Henry. The air around him was thick with tension, and he felt every inch of the past pulling him back to that painful moment when Eliza had walked away from him. His thoughts swirled, but a voice broke through the fog, soft, almost a whisper, but unmistakable. It was Eliza walking toward him, her footsteps slow, deliberate. As she approached, Dylan straightened up, his heart hammering in his chest. He expected her to pass by, to join the crowd, to embrace her new life. But instead, she stopped in front of him, looking at him with those same haunted eyes he remembered so well. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The silence stretched between them, heavy and uncomfortable, until Eliza finally broke it. "I'm sorry, Dylan," she whispered, her voice filled with pain. "I never wanted this. None of this was my choice." Her words pierced through him like a knife, and he found himself frozen, unsure of how to respond. "Why are you doing this?" Dylan asked, his voice thick with emotion. "Why go through with it if you don't love him, if you don't want to be here?" Eliza's face contorted with a mixture of anger and despair. She stepped closer, lowering her voice to a near inaudible level. "Because I don't have a choice, Dylan. You don't understand." Her hands trembled as she ran them through her hair, as if trying to keep herself composed. Dylan could see the cracks forming in her facade, the mask of composure slipping away, revealing the raw vulnerability underneath. Taking a deep breath, Eliza spoke again, her words barely above a whisper. "My marriage to Henry, it's a sham. It's a prison. I'm trapped and he's the warden." Dylan's stomach twisted at her words, a dark sense of foreboding settling over him. "I thought you left me because you didn't want me anymore," Dylan said, a mixture of anger and confusion flooding his voice. Eliza shook her head slowly, the tears beginning to gather in her eyes. "I never wanted to leave you, Dylan. I never wanted to lose you, but my family, they made choices for me, choices that I couldn't escape." She paused, taking another shaky breath, and continued, "Henry, he has something on me, something from my past. And if I don't marry him, if I don't comply, he'll destroy me." Dylan's mind raced as he tried to process what she was saying. The woman standing before him wasn't the same carefree soul he had once loved. There was something darker in her eyes now, something that had been hidden for far too long. "What is it? What does he have on you?" Dylan demanded, his voice rising. Eliza's gaze flickered to the ground, and she hesitated before answering, her voice trembling. "It's a mistake I made when I was younger, something I thought I could bury. But Henry found out. He knows everything, Dylan." Her hands clenched into fists at her sides as she continued, her words laced with regret. "I thought I could outrun it, but he He won't let me go. I'm his prisoner now." The weight of her confession hit Dylan like a physical blow. This wasn't just a love story gone wrong. This wasn't some fleeting romantic tragedy. No, this was something far more sinister, something that had ensnared Eliza in a web of manipulation and control. He reached out, his hand brushing against hers, trying to offer some comfort, but she pulled back, the tears now freely falling down her cheeks. "I couldn't escape my past," she whispered again, her voice breaking. "I thought I could move on, start fresh, but Henry won't let me go. I'm tied to him, and I always will be." Dylan stood frozen, unsure of what to say, of how to fix the shattered pieces of her life that now lay before him. "What is it, Eliza?" Dylan finally asked, his voice full of desperation. "What did you do? What's the secret?" Eliza looked up at him, her eyes filled with fear. She opened her mouth as though to speak, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, she turned away from him, taking a few steps back. "You don't want to know, Dylan," she said softly. "You never did." Her voice trembled with an emotion that Dylan couldn't quite place, guilt, fear, or something far darker. As she walked away, leaving him standing there, he realized that Eliza's sin was far more than just a metaphor. It was a real, tangible thing, something that tied her to Henry in a way he couldn't begin to understand. But one thing was certain: the woman he once knew was gone, and the mystery of her past would haunt them both forever. The reception hall buzzed with laughter, music, and the clinking of glasses, but to Dylan, everything felt muffled, distant. He stood off to the side, watching Eliza as she tried to blend in with the celebrations, her face painted with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. The joy around her seemed hollow, and it gnawed at Dylan's gut. He could see the cracks in her carefully constructed mask, the way her shoulders slumped slightly, the way her eyes darted away from anyone who looked too closely. His heart ached for her, for the woman who had once been so full of life, now a shadow of herself, caught in a web of lies and obligations she couldn't escape. Dylan's anger simmered beneath the surface, directed not just at Eliza's situation but at Henry, the man who had trapped her in this life. He watched Henry laugh with guests, acting as if everything was perfect, unaware of the turmoil brewing just beneath the surface. Dylan's fists clenched, his knuckles white with the pressure. How could Henry not see the pain he was causing Eliza? How could he stand there, so smug when he knew the truth, that this marriage was nothing but a cage for her? The more Dylan observed, the more his resentment for Henry grew. The more he realized just how deeply Eliza was suffering. His instincts screamed at him to confront Henry, to tear down the facade, but he hesitated. He didn't know what good it would do or how it would change anything. But then, just as the night wore on, Henry approached Dylan with an air of superiority, his eyes glinting with a challenge. "You still haven't moved on, have you?" Henry sneered, his words thick with contempt. "You're still obsessed with her even now. Pathetic." Dylan froze, anger flaring instantly. Henry's words stung like a slap in the face, but Dylan held back. He didn't want to give Henry the satisfaction of a reaction, not here, not in front of the guests. But the tension between them was palpable, like a storm on the horizon, waiting for the smallest spark to set it off. "You don't know anything about me or Eliza," Dylan muttered through gritted teeth. But Henry wasn't satisfied with just a few words. Henry's smile widened, his voice growing louder as he taunted Dylan. "She's my wife now. She's mine, and there's nothing you can do about it." The words were meant to provoke, to push Dylan over the edge. And they worked. Dylan's anger boiled over, and before he could stop himself, he took a step forward, his eyes locked with Henry's. "You think you own her?" Dylan's voice was low but full of raw emotion. "You don't own anything, Henry. You've just chained her down with your lies." The words hung heavy in the air, but before anything else could be said, a sharp, trembling voice cut through the heated confrontation. It was Eliza, stepping into the middle of the two men, her eyes wide with a mix of fear and determination. Eliza's face was pale, and the pain in her eyes was unmistakable. She stood there for a moment, gathering herself before her voice rang out louder than before. This wedding, this marriage, it's a lie. I've been living a life I didn't choose. The entire room went still. The music stopped. Conversations died out, and every eye turned toward her. Her words hit the guests like a bombshell, and for a moment, it felt as though time had stopped. Dylan watched as Eliza's hands trembled, her shoulders shaking with the force of her confession. The woman he had loved, the woman who had been so full of hope, now stood before him, stripped of pretense and facade. And in that moment, Dylan knew there was no going back. The air was thick with the weight of Eliza's confession. Her voice cracked as she continued, the vulnerability in her tone stripping away the last layers of the life she had been pretending to live. "I am the bride of sin," she whispered, but the words were loud enough for the room to hear. The silence that followed was deafening. The guests looked at one another, uncertain of how to respond, as Eliza's words settled over them like a dark cloud. Dylan's heart clenched as he realized just how deeply Eliza had been carrying her burden, how much she had hidden from everyone, including him. And now, the truth was out in the open, hanging in the air like a secret too dark to keep. The moment stretched, a palpable tension filling the room. Dylan's gaze locked on Eliza's, and for the first time in years he saw her clearly, truly clearly. There was no mask, no act, just a woman drowning in her own regrets. But what could he do now? What could he possibly say? His mind raced, and he found himself caught between his love for her and the reality of what had been done. The truth was now undeniable, and Dylan knew that nothing could ever be the same between them again. But as he stood there, in the aftermath of Eliza's confession, one question burned in his mind. What would happen next? Would they finally break free of the chains that had bound them for so long? Or would they be trapped in this painful cycle forever? Dylan took a step toward Eliza, his heart heavy with the weight of the situation. The truth had been revealed, but what now? What would the guests think? What would Henry do? The silence was broken only by the sound of Eliza's soft sobs as she stood there, her shoulders shaking. Dylan reached out a hand, unsure of what to offer, but unsure of what else to do. As he touched her arm gently, he looked around at the faces in the crowd, each one a mix of shock, confusion, and curiosity. But none of that mattered now. The truth was out. The question remained, could Dylan, could Eliza find a way to heal from the darkness that had followed them for so long? The room remained frozen in the aftermath of Eliza's confession, the silence thick with anticipation, as if everyone were waiting for a signal, some indication of how to react, who would speak, what would happen next. The guests, unsure of what to do, exchanged glances, but no one moved. It was as though time had momentarily stopped. Dylan stood at the edge of the crowd, his hands clenched into fists at his sides, his heart pounding in his chest. He could feel the eyes of everyone on him, their silent expectations weighing down on him, but he wasn't sure what the right move was. Then, without warning, he took a step forward. Dylan raised his glass high, his voice cutting through the suffocating silence like a knife. "To the bride of sin," he said, his words ringing out, bold and defiant. "The woman I once loved and never stopped loving." The words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of their history, their love, and the years that had passed between them. The shock was immediate. A collective gasp swept through the crowd as they processed his words. Instead of responding with anger, accusations, Dylan had chosen to show his unwavering support for Eliza. He wasn't here to condemn her. He was here to acknowledge the pain she had endured and the choices she had been forced to make. The guests stood in stunned silence, unable to comprehend what they were witnessing. Dylan, the cowboy, who had always been known for his grit and no-nonsense demeanor, had just made a public gesture that no one could have expected. Instead of attacking Eliza or criticizing her for her actions, he had lifted her up, offering a tribute to the woman she was, despite everything that had transpired. The act was both noble and tragic, a raw display of love and heartbreak intertwined. In that moment, Dylan had laid bare his soul, showing the depth of his feelings and the toll the years had taken on him. Eliza, standing a few feet away, felt her heart shatter all over again. She'd been preparing herself for the worst, dread and guilt clouding her every thought, but instead Dylan had shown her something she hadn't dared to hope for. His words, his gesture, were a balm to her broken spirit. For a brief moment, she felt as if the weight of her secrets had been lifted, as if she could breathe for the first time in years. Tears welled in her eyes as she struggled to maintain her composure, but her face crumpled, and she let the tears fall freely. She had been trapped in her past, forced into a marriage she didn't choose, but Dylan's unwavering love and support, in the face of everything that had happened, made her feel like she could finally escape. The guests, many of whom had been quietly observing the drama unfold, were now visibly moved. The tension in the room melted away, replaced by an overwhelming sense of compassion. People who had been so eager to celebrate the perfect wedding, the fairy tale ending, now stood in awe of the complexity of Eliza's life and the choices she had made. There was no simple answer to the mess they were witnessing, no neat resolution to the chaos that had erupted. But Dylan's gesture, his steadfast devotion to Eliza, made it clear that love wasn't always about the easiest path or the most glamorous choice. It was about standing by someone, even in the darkest of times. Henry, who had been standing at the front of the room, watching the exchange between Dylan and Eliza, now appeared visibly shaken, his face drained of color, his lips pressed into a tight line as he realized the depth of the bond between the two. Eliza and Dylan shared something that Henry could never understand, something that ran deeper than the wealth he had offered her or the security he had promised. He was just a placeholder in a life that had never been hers to claim. The realization hit Henry like a cold wave, and his posture stiffened as he tried to maintain control of the situation. But there was no denying it now. His world had just crumbled, and the perfect marriage he had envisioned was nothing more than a farce. The atmosphere shifted dramatically, and it was clear that the power had shifted in the room. Dylan had made his move, had shown his cards, and now it was up to Eliza to make hers. Would she choose the man who had been by her side through thick and thin, the one who had never truly given up on her? Or would she remain with Henry, the man who had forced her into a corner and manipulated her every move? The room was holding its collective breath, waiting for Eliza's decision. She stood there, caught between the two men, one who had hurt her deeply, and one who had loved her unconditionally, despite everything. Dylan's gaze never left Eliza, his eyes filled with a mixture of hope and sorrow. The love he had for her was still there, raw and real, but he knew the choice was hers to make. It always had been. He had laid his heart bare before her, his love unyielding, his gesture a testament to the depth of his feelings. The ball was now in her court. What would she do? Would she choose the safety and security of a life with Henry, or would she take the leap into the unknown with Dylan, knowing that their history and their love were the only things that truly mattered? The tension in the room reached its peak, and the air crackled with anticipation. As Eliza wiped her tears away, she looked from Dylan to Henry, her heart heavy with the weight of her decision. She knew that whatever choice she made would change everything. The future she had once envisioned with Henry was now tainted, and the life she had once shared with Dylan seemed like a distant memory. But in this moment, she realized that it wasn't just about the past or the future. It was about who she was now, who she could be. She took a deep breath, her heart racing, and knew that whatever happened next, she would finally be free of the chains that had held her for so long. As the night continued, the once celebratory atmosphere of the reception now felt like a distant memory. The air was thick with unresolved tension, and the once lively conversations had now given way to hushed murmurs and quiet glances. Eliza stood at the edge of the room, feeling the weight of Dylan's earlier gesture pressing down on her. His words had cracked open a door she had long kept shut, and now she felt overwhelmed by the magnitude of her decision. She had lived in the shadows for so long, afraid to confront the past, but Dylan's unwavering love had changed everything. She knew in this moment that she couldn't continue living in the lie she had built. With a heavy heart, Eliza walked over to Henry, who stood near the center of the room, his face pale and stoic. He had been watching her, no doubt expecting her to remain in the life they had constructed together. But the truth had come crashing down, and she could no longer pretend. As she reached him, she looked into his eyes, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "I cannot live a life of lies," she said, each word feeling like a weight lifted off her chest. "I belong to my past, but I cannot deny my future anymore." Her hand trembled as she removed her wedding ring and placed it into his palm, the symbol of a life she could no longer claim. Henry stood frozen, his eyes flickering with a mixture of anger and disbelief. He had expected to have control over her, to keep her tethered to the life he had carefully crafted for them. But now it was clear that Eliza had made her choice. Her words were a declaration of her freedom, a choice that left no room for doubt. Henry's jaw tightened as he stared at the ring in his hand, his gaze moving back to Eliza. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Finally, without a word, Henry turned away, defeated, and walked out of the room. There was no argument, no final plea, just the quiet sound of his footsteps as he left the life they had shared behind. Eliza stood there, her chest rising and falling with each shaky breath. The room seemed to spin for a moment, and she closed her eyes, allowing herself to feel the full weight of her decision. She had given up a life of comfort, security, and expectations, but in doing so, she had taken her first real step toward reclaiming her own life. She turned toward Dylan, the man who had always been there for her, even when she had pushed him away. Their eyes met, and in that moment, Eliza saw the love and the pain they both shared. She stepped forward, and without a word, she fell into his arms. Dylan wrapped his arms around her, holding her tightly, as if afraid she might slip away again. The emotions between them were raw, unfiltered, and they didn't need words to communicate. In that embrace, Eliza found a sense of solace she hadn't known she needed, but there was no elation, no relief. It was a bittersweet moment, one that carried the weight of years of heartache and betrayal. They had both lost so much, and yet, in the midst of it all, they had found each other again. But the road ahead was not clear, and Eliza knew the scars of their past would never truly fade. The camera lingered on Dylan's face as they held each other, capturing the depth of the moment. His expression was a mixture of relief and sorrow, as if he knew that this was the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. Eliza, now free from the chains that had bound her, was no longer the same woman he had once known. She had endured so much, and he couldn't help but wonder if the woman standing in his arms would ever truly be able to heal from everything she had been through. The love between them was undeniable, but it was also complicated, marked by the pain of their shared history. As the evening wore on, the party slowly began to dissolve. The guests, once buzzing with excitement, now trickled out of the venue, leaving only a handful of people behind. Dylan and Eliza stood in the center of the empty room, their hands entwined, the weight of their journey settling over them. There was no grand celebration, no dramatic resolution, only the quiet understanding that they had both made it through something unimaginable. Eliza had finally freed herself from the life she had been forced into, but the cost of that freedom was the emotional toll it had taken on both of them. The final shot of the evening captured them walking out of the venue, hand in hand, their silhouettes framed by the soft light of the doorway. There was no applause, no cheering. The world outside seemed distant, and the weight of their past hung heavily between them. They walked together, not as the couple they once were, but as two people who had fought to survive, to move beyond their pain. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, they were walking it together. The emotional scars would remain, but they had each other, and that was enough for now. The room still buzzed with the lingering shock of Eliza's bold declaration, but it was a different kind of energy now, one filled with confusion, whispers, and the heavy weight of unspoken words. The guests had no idea how to process what had just transpired. Some stood frozen in disbelief, while others slowly began to move away, unsure of how to act. The perfect wedding they had once imagined had turned into something far darker, and no one could deny the gravity of the situation. Dylan and Eliza, however, needed to get away from the chaos, to find a moment of peace amid the storm. They silently retreated to a quiet corner, their presence barely noticed in the wake of the whirlwind they had just caused. As they sat together in the dimly lit corner, the weight of the moment began to settle over them. The deafening silence that followed Eliza's confession still hung thick in the air, and they could feel the sting of it, even in the solitude of their small corner. Eliza's hands trembled slightly as she stared down at the floor, her mind spinning. She felt liberated, yes, but also burdened by the guilt that had been festering inside her for so long. She had taken a step toward freedom, but the cost was still too high. Her voice broke the silence, soft but laced with regret. "You never should have raised that glass. You didn't know what you were doing." Dylan's gaze never wavered as he looked at her. His expression was calm, unwavering, and the depth of his belief in her was clear. "I knew exactly what I was doing," he replied, his voice steady but filled with conviction. "I knew you needed someone to see you, really see you, without judgment. I couldn't sit back and watch you disappear into a life you didn't choose. I had to give you a moment of clarity, a moment where you didn't have to hide." His words, though simple, held a weight that cut through the layers of guilt and shame Eliza had been carrying. Dylan wasn't there to fix her or to save her. He was there to see her as she was, flawed, broken, and beautiful all the same. Eliza's eyes filled with tears as she listened to him, the enormity of everything crashing down on her all at once. She had spent years hiding behind a mask, trying to keep the truth of her past buried, trying to be someone she wasn't for the sake of security. Now, in this quiet moment with Dylan, she found herself confronting everything she had tried to avoid. "But what if my past is too much to overcome?" she whispered, her voice trembling with uncertainty. "What if I've done things so terrible that I can never truly be free of them? What if I'm not worthy of happiness?" She looked at him, hoping for some kind of reassurance, but fearing that she would never be able to outrun the mistakes she had made. Dylan took a deep breath and reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. "Your past doesn't define who you are, Eliza. It's part of you, yes, but it's not the whole of you. You can't change what's happened, but you can choose what comes next. I'm not going to pretend it's going to be easy, but I believe in you. You deserve happiness, and you deserve to be free." His words were simple, but filled with an unshakable belief that Eliza could rebuild herself, that she could move past the darkness that had haunted her for so long. In that moment, it felt like Dylan was her anchor, holding her steady against the storm of emotions swirling around them. But even as Eliza allowed herself to feel the warmth of Dylan's support, the reality of her situation was far from over. In the background, Henry was still processing what had happened. Humiliated, enraged, and feeling as though his control had slipped through his fingers, he seethed in silence. He had been exposed for the manipulator he was, and it was clear to him that this wedding had become a mockery. But Henry's pride wouldn't let him walk away from this without retribution. He knew that he had been bested tonight, but this was far from the end of the story. He was calculating, waiting for the right moment to make his move, and it was clear that the battle for Eliza's future was only just beginning. Henry, lurking in the shadows of the reception hall, made a quiet but resolute vow to himself. He would not let Eliza and Dylan's defiance go unpunished. He would find a way to regain control over the situation, to make them both pay for daring to defy him in front of so many. Henry knew that he had lost the battle tonight, but the war was far from over. His revenge would be calculated, patient, and devastating. And as he watched Eliza and Dylan together, he could already feel the gears of his plan beginning to turn. Eliza, meanwhile, was lost in the whirlwind of her own emotions, torn between the weight of her past mistakes and the glimmer of hope Dylan had given her. She had spent so many years believing that she was unworthy of love, of redemption, but Dylan's unwavering belief in her was slowly breaking through the walls she had built around her heart. Could she really change? Could she leave the shadow of her past behind and step into a future that didn't carry the burden of her guilt? The road ahead seemed uncertain, but as Dylan's hand tightened around hers, she felt a small spark of hope that maybe, just maybe, she could be more than her mistakes. But even as Eliza leaned on Dylan's support, she couldn't shake the feeling that the real fight was just beginning. The weight of her past was still there, looming large in the background, and Henry's looming threat was a constant reminder that there was much more at stake than just her own personal journey. Dylan's belief in her was a steady force, but she knew that her path to redemption would be far from simple. The stakes had never been higher, and the road ahead was filled with uncertainty, but with Dylan by her side, she felt ready to face whatever came next. Days passed in a quiet, uneasy haze, as Dylan and Eliza remained hidden in the seclusion of the small cabin. The outside world seemed far away, but its shadows were never too far from their minds. Eliza, who had once been so full of life and ambition, now felt the weight of her past pressing down on her like a suffocating blanket. The guilt gnawed at her, a constant painful reminder of the life she had left behind and the mistakes that had led her here. Dylan tried his best to comfort her, but no words seemed to reach her. Her mind was consumed with regret, haunted by the things she could never undo and the life she had betrayed in the pursuit of freedom. Dylan, though weary and burdened by the silent tension between them, refused to let Eliza fall into the abyss of her own guilt. He sat by her side, offering solace in his quiet presence, trying to assure her that they could face whatever came next together. Yet, he knew the truth. He could shield her from the outside world, but he couldn't take away the pain of her past. As night fell, the weight of their situation became even more suffocating. Eliza would stare at the shadows on the wall, her eyes distant, and Dylan would hold her, silently wishing there was more he could do to take away the burden that crushed her spirit. But he knew they couldn't stay hidden forever. The world would come for them, sooner or later. The sudden knock at the door shattered the uneasy quiet that had settled over the cabin. Dylan's instincts flared as he immediately stood, his hand instinctively reaching for the rifle by the door. Eliza's eyes went wide, her breath catching in her throat. She knew without a doubt who it was. Henry. He had found them. The sound of heavy boots followed the knock, and Dylan's grip on the rifle tightened. There was no way out this time. The door creaked open, revealing Henry standing in the doorway with a band of men behind him, each one taller, broader, and more intimidating than the last. The tension in the air was thick with unspoken threats, and Henry's eyes were filled with cold, calculated fury. Henry stepped into the cabin, his gaze locking onto Eliza with the intensity of a predator closing in on its prey. "You betrayed me," he spat, his voice filled with venom. "You think you can run away from me, but you're wrong. You'll never be free." He took a step forward, his men flanking him, creating an intimidating wall around them. "You're going to come back to me, Eliza," he continued, his voice low and menacing. "If you don't, I will destroy you. I will make sure everyone knows what you've done. The world will see you for what you really are. The secret you've spent years hiding will be exposed." His words cut deep, each one a reminder of the dark hold he still had over her. Eliza's heart pounded in her chest as she listened, feeling the weight of his threat settle into her bones. It was too much. Eliza's eyes welled with tears as she finally broke under the pressure of the man standing before her. Her guilt, her fear, and the years of hiding her truth all collided in a single, overwhelming moment. She stepped forward, her voice shaking with the intensity of her emotions. "You don't understand, Dylan," she whispered, her words barely audible. I wasn't just a woman who made a mistake. It wasn't just a sin. It was an affair. I slept with Henry's brother, and it led to to everything falling apart. I never wanted it to happen, but it did. And now everything is broken because of me. Her chest heaved as she gasped for breath, her entire body trembling as she released the confession that had haunted her for so long. Dylan stood frozen for a moment, the weight of Eliza's words crashing over him like a wave. His mind raced, trying to process everything she had just revealed. Henry's brother? The affair had been more than just a momentary lapse in judgment. It had set off a chain of events that had destroyed their lives. But as Dylan looked into Eliza's eyes, he saw the fear, the regret, and the vulnerability that had been hidden beneath her strong exterior for so long. His heart swelled with a renewed determination. He stepped forward, his voice firm and unwavering. "We face this together, Eliza," he said, his words simple but filled with conviction. "You're not alone anymore. We'll fight this together no matter what it costs." Henry's eyes darkened with fury as Dylan's words echoed in the small cabin. His grip on his men tightened, and his cold sneer only deepened. He wasn't going to let them walk away unscathed. This confrontation was only just beginning, and he had every intention of making sure that Dylan and Eliza paid for defying him. But Eliza and Dylan, in that moment, were no longer the people who had been trapped by his control. They had found something stronger, each other, and that made them formidable. Dylan turned to Eliza, his gaze soft yet filled with an intensity that made it clear they were no longer running. The battle was coming, and it would be a fight that would decide their fates.